Good morning. I've been on 24-hour call with my job all weekend and all this week, so I must admit that I haven't put forth the effort that I usually do to prepare a lesson, but I think you'll find that when we get to today's verse, that there's just really not much of it in the Bible, but there is a lot of the fact that God judges. So together we have already concluded the first chapter of Amos. In the last lesson, we finished that up. And this morning, we'll begin Amos chapter 2. And we will expound on the judgment of Moab. And in the previous lesson, we saw that Ammon were traditionally regarded as descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot. And much like Edom and Israel, they had a kinship, a camaraderie. And so did Ammon and Moab have a relative connection. Ammon and Moab, both through Abraham's nephew Lot. And the topical call for this morning's lesson is not focusing on the inbreeding of Lot with his daughters, but the fact is important to understand that Abraham's nephew Lot had 2 sons. By each daughter gave, or they bear a son. And Lot got his daughters out of Sodom and Gomorrah, but couldn't get Sodom and Gomorrah out of his daughters. So let's go to Genesis chapter 19, verses 36 and 38 real quick, to set the stage for Moab. Those were both the daughters of Lot, with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ami. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. So now, when the scripture here says the same unto this day, it is implying to that day, the day of the ancient audience, right? So you're not going to find a representative for Ammon or Moab at the United Nations. That day is over for Moab and Ammon. Amos chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Moab, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. Because he burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. But I will send a fire upon Moab, and it shall devour the palaces of Kerioth. And Moab shall die with tumult, with shouting, and with the sound of the trumpet. And I will cut off the judge from the midst thereof, and will slay all the princes thereof with him, saith the Lord. So Moab was judged by God. The palaces of Kerioth devoured. Moab was destroyed with tumult and shouts of a trumpet. And the judges were cut off, and the princes slain. But for what? What did they do? What did Moab do? For burning the bones of the king of Edom into lime. Think of that. Burning the bones of the king of Edom into lime. Now how are we to understand this? They burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. Well, the God of Amos, for the most part, is unknown to the world today. Well, I shouldn't speak for the world. I should speak from observation and evidence. The God of Amos, for the most part, is unknown to America today. The bones of the king of Edom were burned into lime. Now, how many nations, past, present, and future, believe or believed that the difficulties, the shortcomings, and tribulations that they are facing, or have faced, or will face, particularly unbelieving nations, believe circumstances of peril arise, or will arise, and has to do with the true and living God of the Scriptures. For nations historically and present for the manner in which nations treat other nations or their representatives for countries, kings, presidents, prime ministers, how they make decisions of how other countries will be treated. Babylon was once a great nation. Where's Assyria, that prominent, dominant kingdom of Syria then? Where are they? Where's the mighty nation of Rome today? Oh, Rome's there. But that mighty nation of Rome, where are they at? Now, if you say you believe in Jesus Christ, the true and living God of the Bible, then you believe the judgments in that book, the judgments in the Gospels, the judgments here in Amos upon Damascus and Sidon, Tyre and Ammon, Edom, Gaza, and the soon coming in the future lessons, judgments on Judah and Israel. All orchestrated providentially by the Creator God of the universe, of the cosmos. Now Moab mistreated the bones of the king of Edom. That was the reason for God to judge Moab. Now, how many in the United States of America, in these concrete structures with steeples on top, with entertainment halls, gyms, and snow cone machines, believe honestly that the way an unbelieving nation treats another nation or country of unbelieving peoples is even seen or witnessed by God? God sees every single nation, every single person, historically and present. How many truly believe that God sees all? Or do they just with their mouth say God knows all as a part of oral tradition? God's will and judgment is worked through humanity and creation, as far as how people made in God's image treat another people made in God's image. For the majority of people, everything is a result of unprovable second causes. For instance, and I'm not attempting to be a political mouthpiece whatsoever, but global warming and climate change, for instance. The idea of an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere and cows is the cause for climate change. It's an unproven second cause. The climate changes every day. The earth, it operates. It operates by the designer, the Creator God. God is saying something in the rain. He's saying something in the wind, the floods, all seasons. And I remember back a couple years, everyone was saying Mother Nature. Mother Nature dried the underbrush in California that caused those fires. And Mother Nature flooded all these farmlands and cities nationwide. It was all seen by God. And the lifestyles of the hardened-hearted, God allowed them to exist in their irresponsibilities. Romans 1 will give clarity to that hardened-heartedness. God's in tune with space, time, and history. So the leaders of Moab and the mistreatment of the king of Edom's bones and the consequences for it by God reflects once again in Amos the dissatisfaction God has for hate against others. Look at the disrespect of leaders and representatives in 1 Chronicles 19. David sent representatives to King Nahash, the king of Ammon. They didn't believe the message that David sent by them. So they disrespected them, and they cut off their clothes and cut their beards in half. They acted out their disrespect for the nation Israel, insulting and disobedience. the representatives David sent to be a comfort to them. And Jesus knew he was being assaulted through the persecution his people were suffering for him. When the bones of a head of a nation, a king of a nation, is being mistreated for burning them to lime, leaders, presidents, rulers, they are hoodwinked. They are fools to think how they treat others is not known by the true God. Look today how many rulers and presidents prove that they do not know God by how they treat other nations and countries and people. The nation of Moab was judged by God for the treatment of the king of Edom's bones, turning them into lime to such an extent that the bones marrow, the ligaments, they were burnt to ash. Now Amos doesn't say when or where this took place, but Amos is a prophet of God, and we have the infallible record, the Bible. Did the king of Edom die and was buried? And the natural hatred towards the king of Edom festers so hot in the unregenerate minds of the Moabites that they dug up his body and reduced his bones to lime, as was the case with John Wycliffe by the gospel-hating Jesuits? I don't know. But it appeared, and God said it did. It appeared in the pages of the Scripture. So the treatment of other people, even if they're dead, is something God is aware of. Look at how Jesus' body was treated after it had been mistreated. And you can read in Revelation and get a gist of that judgment. But after the Philistines mistreated the body of Saul and his sons, what is recorded of the valiant men doing? In 1 Samuel chapter 31, verses 11 and 12, it says, "And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the body of his sons from the wall of Bethshan and came to Jabesh and burnt them there." They didn't burn them to lime. No, sir. Because what do we read in 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verse 11? "And when all Jabesh Gilead heard all the Philistines had done to Saul, they arose, all the valiant men, and took away the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons, and brought them to Jabesh, and buried their bones under the oak in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days." They burnt off their rotting flesh after having been on that wall for who knows how long. They took those bones out of respect to even this disobedient king. They took his bones and they buried them. They buried his bones, this king that rebelled against God. They buried the bones. They were called valiant men for doing this. And God is aware how people treat and mistreat the living and the dead. The Moabite nation was judged how they treated the bones of a pagan king. Look at what God has witnessed, just say in the last 100 years. The bones of so many kings and the people of the king's nation that have been destroyed. World War II, Vietnam, Japan, Nagasaki, Hiroshima. Bones disappeared to dust, vaporized. If God judged Moab for burning the bones of one king of Edom, how patient is he with the nuclear-powered Western nations? And God is unknown by Russia, America, China, any nation that has weapons of mass destruction. What do you think God thinks of president after president after president with full support from Democrat and Republican Party to risk innocent lives for gain? There's only one party in Washington. It's the War Machine Party. The never-ending war machine. The missile and drone campaign continues. President after president, Democrat or Republican, the war campaign continues. As long as we can have our Starbucks, and long as we can have our utilities for convenience, it's okay, right? Right? Back to the beginning of this lesson. Do you believe the accounts of judgment in the Bible? Do you believe God? If God wanted those fires in California, for instance, to cease, he could. If he so desired the floods to reside, he would. If he wanted the untamed hearts and unregenerate minds of these rioters to stop, he would convert those rogue hearts. Now, think why we're in this state of chaos, of wrong is right. Till next time.